The European Union is one of the world's most influential political and economic blocs, but it faces numerous challenges and opportunities that could shape its future. Will the EU be around throughout the 21st century? The European Union has an intricate history that began in the aftermath of World War II. With Europe devastated by conflict, leaders sought a way to prevent future wars through economic cooperation. This led to the creation of the European Coal and Steel Community in 1951, bringing 6 countries together: France, West Germany, Italy, Belgium, the Netherlands, and Luxembourg. The idea was simple. If key industries were shared, war between these nations would become nearly impossible. Building on this success, the Treaty of Rome in 1957 established the European Economic Community, laying the foundation for deeper economic integration. Over the following decades, the Union expanded, both in size and influence. The 1993 Maastricht Treaty officially created the European Union, creating political cooperation alongside economic ties. Shortly after, in 1999, the EU launched its own currency, the euro, further uniting its member states financially. The early 21st century saw the rapid expansion into Eastern Europe, but also challenges like the 2008 financial crisis. In addition, throughout the last decade, there has been a rise of nationalism in many European nations, and this led to Brexit, when the United Kingdom voted to leave the EU and did on January 31st, 2020, making it the first sovereign major nation in Europe to do so. The UK's decision to leave the European Union, known as Brexit, was a result of decades of political and economic debate. The UK joined the European Economic Community in 1973, but skepticism over sovereignty, immigration, and financial contributions grew over time. From the 1980s to the 2010s, there was a lot of back and forth of the debate of whether the UK should stay in the European Union. Through the period of British membership, Eurosceptic parties emerged, including some members of the Conservative Party and especially the far-right-wing party Reform UK, started in 2018 and headed by Nigel Farage. In February of 2016, then Parliament member Boris Johnson supported Vote Leave, a campaigning organization that supported a Leave vote for the 2016 United Kingdom European Union membership referendum. On June 23rd, the United Kingdom voted 51.89 to 48.11% to leave the European Union, with a high voter turnout of 72.2%. The decision triggered years of political debate, negotiations, and economic uncertainty, and led to the resignation of Prime Minister David Cameron. There are many reasons why more Brits voted to leave. Many voters were concerned about sovereignty, believing that the United Kingdom should have more control over its laws, regulations, and borders rather than being subject to EU rules. Immigration was another major issue, as some felt that freedom of movement within the EU had led to excessive migration, straining public services and jobs. Economic concerns also played a role, with critics arguing that EU membership was costly and that the UK could negotiate better trade deals independently. Additionally, there was distrust of EU bureaucracy, with some seeing it as undemocratic and unaccountable. On January 31st, 2020, the United Kingdom officially left the European Union, ending its nearly 50-year commitment. While the nation did vote to leave, the decision was split between countries within the United Kingdom. England and Wales both voted to leave the EU, 53.4% to 46.6%, and 52.5% to 47.5% respectively. But Scotland and Northern Ireland voted to remain in the EU, 62% to 38%, and 55.8% to 44.2%. Scotland voted overwhelmingly to remain in the EU due to several economic, political, and social factors. Economically, Scotland benefited significantly from EU trade, subsidies, and funding, particularly in industries like fishing, agriculture, and research. Politically, many Scots saw EU membership as a safeguard against Westminster policies that did not always align with Scotland's interest, reinforcing their desire for greater autonomy. Socially, Scotland has historically been more pro-European than other parts of the UK, with strong support for free movement and multiculturalism. In addition, mostly all of the major UK cities voted to stay in, while smaller towns and rural areas voted to leave. To know more about the dynamics of the European Union, let's explore how it's organized today. The organization operates under a mix of free market policies and social protection, with strong trade relationships both within and outside its borders. The euro, its official currency, is used by 20 of the 27 EU nations and is one of the world's most widely used and traded currencies. Also, the euro is one of the strongest currencies in the world, more so than the US dollar, but less than the British pound sterling. The EU's total GDP is $29 trillion, and Germany, Europe's largest economy, along with France and Italy, make up 42% of it. The average per capita income between all member states is around $65,000 a year, with Luxembourg having the highest and Bulgaria the lowest. Geopolitically, the EU operates through a hybrid system of external and internal decision-making. For example, the EU controls trade policy, sanctions, competition rules, and regulatory standards for its member states. Also, most EU members, along with non-members Switzerland, Iceland, Liechtenstein, and Norway, are part of the Schengen area, which officially has abolished border controls. The only EU member exceptions are Ireland, Bulgaria, Romania, and Cyprus. This means that someone can hypothetically travel from Portugal to Estonia without going through border patrols. Within the European Union, wealthier member states contribute more to the EU budget, while less affluent nations receive more funding through various programs. Net contributors, such as Germany, France, the Netherlands, and Sweden, pay more into the budget than they receive, largely funding regional development, agricultural subsidies, and infrastructure projects in net beneficiary countries like Poland, Hungary, and Romania. These beneficiaries rely on EU cohesion funds to modernize their economies, improve infrastructure, and reduce disparities between richer and poorer regions. There's always been skepticism of the EU from various peoples within the EU and non-EU nations within Europe. However, this distrust has risen in the 21st century. During the 20th century, politics within democracies of Europe was more mainstream and tamer, and usually Big Tent parties, broad-based political parties that accommodate a wide range of ideologies and interest groups, were prominent. Typically, these parties are more favorable towards globalization and having collective relationships with other nations, and this was and still is the case within the EU. During the 21st century, however, this slowly started to change with the rise of more nationalistic parties, both extreme left and right-wing ones. On the left, usually socialist or communist parties are anti-EU, but for reasons such as being anti-capitalist and against certain EU economic policies that they have said prioritize banks and multinational corporations over social welfare. La France Insoumise, a far-left French political party, is the most prominent of outlier political parties in a major EU nation. As of the 2024 French legislative elections, La France Insoumise holds 74 seats in the 577-member National Assembly, constituting approximately 12.8% of the total seats. While far-left parties are vocal opponents to the EU, far-right European parties have grown even more so, especially in the last decade. The 2015 European migrant crisis was a period of mass migration from unstable Middle East and North African nations, especially Syria, which was war-torn from an ongoing civil war. An estimated 1.3 million migrants came to Europe, and Germany accepted many of them. With this ongoing for a few years, several European Union nations made a rightward shift politically. In August of 2015, Poland elected Law and Justice Party member Andrzej Duda as president, and in October, in the parliamentary elections, the party won the majority. The Law and Justice Party was founded in 2001 and became a prominent right-wing populist party in Poland, becoming somewhat Eurosceptic, including in being against adopting the euro currency. But it became more vocally opposed to the EU's efforts to distribute migrants among member states. Many Poles voted for the Law and Justice Party in 2015 because of their opposition to accepting migrants, many of whom were from Muslim-majority countries. Hungary, another EU post-Soviet satellite nation, also had a right-wing government that became opposed to mass migration. While Poland and Hungary were opposed to migration a decade ago, other EU nations continued to allow migrants to seek asylum, including Germany, France, Sweden, Denmark, the Netherlands, and Belgium. And the Schengen Agreement made migration more pronounced thanks to open borders. But things were slowly starting to change. A rise in right-wing ideologies throughout Europe led to an increase in native Europeans being wary of migration from the Middle East and North Africa. Many of them believed that the migrants settling in EU nations weren't assimilating, and were concerned that this would lead to extremism. In fact, a series of coordinated terrorist attacks in France, Belgium, Sweden, and Germany did occur, and most of them were linked to Islamist extremism. In the 2025 German federal elections, the CDU party, known as the Christian Democratic Union of Germany, and the conservative center-right party, somewhat opposed to immigration, gained 8 seats in the Bundestag, while the Social Democratic Party, a center-left party led by Chancellor Olaf Scholz, lost 86 seats. But in a dramatic shift, Alternative for Germany, a far-right Eurosceptic anti-immigration party, gained 69 seats, making it now the second most prominent party in the nation after CDU. Obviously, this is signaling that in major EU nations, there's a shift towards Euroscepticism and a rise in nationalism, which ultimately can break apart the European Union in the future. Although the United Kingdom was a former EU nation, there are other European nations who never had any desires to join the organization. In Scandinavia, Sweden, Finland, and Denmark are EU members, but Norway and Iceland aren't. Norway held 2 referendums to join the EU, one in 1972 and the other in 1994, and both failed to pass. Currently, Norway is one of the richest nations in Europe and has the second highest Human Development Index in the world. And many Norwegians are against joining because they believe that they're doing well without the Union. In fact, Norwegians believe that if they were to be part of the EU, it would negatively impact them. Norway has vast oil and gas reserves in the North Sea, and citizens believe they'd have to share profits with other EU nations if a member. Also, Norway has a large primary-based fishing sector, which is not only associated with economic revenue, but also Norwegian cultures and customs. Norway engages in whaling, and in the 20th century killed 350,000 whales, among the highest for a nation in the world. There is criticism to whaling practices, but Norway argues that whale populations are stable enough for sustainable hunting. If they were an EU member, EU's common fisheries policy would impose quotas and allow foreign fleets to fish in Norwegian waters, which Norwegians strongly oppose. In Central Europe, Switzerland is a nation of neutrality and hasn't been in a war or conflict since 1815. This also connects to their opposition to being an EU member. Like Norway, Switzerland is among the wealthiest nations in the world and has the highest Human Development Index of any nation. So realistically, the nation doesn't need the EU. The Swiss feel that if they were to join, they lose a lot of their economic and geopolitical sovereignty. And although Switzerland is part of the Schengen Agreement, they believe that the EU would force the country to accept more immigration than it wants. Then there are candidate EU nations that want to join, but aren't ready yet economically or geopolitically. Most of these nations are geographically located in Eastern and Southeastern Europe. Ukraine and Moldova, both situated near the Black Sea, are aspiring members, but economically, the two are among the poorest of European nations. And Geopolitically, Ukraine is amid a war with Russia after the invasion from them in 2022, and this has caused destabilization. But Ukraine and Moldova have Eurocentric governments who seek greater integration with the EU. In the Balkans, Serbia and Montenegro led the accession process, while North Macedonia and Albania have started negotiations, and Bosnia and Herzegovina recently gained candidate status. But years of the Yugoslav War during the 1990s led to massive destruction of infrastructure, loss of human capital, and economic isolation. Slovenia and Croatia, two post-Yugoslavian nations, have fared a lot better than other Balkans nations and became official EU members in 2004 and 2013 respectively. With candidate nations of the Balkans, EU accession is mixed. For example, Serbia's current government wants to become an EU member, but is taking a pragmatic approach rather than a quick and impractical one. Countries like Albania, North Macedonia, and Montenegro generally have a high public support for EU membership, often exceeding 70%. This likely is associated with the fact that these nations will be beneficiary countries receiving funds to improve their nations internally. And then there's Turkey, the transcontinental nation. Turkey has long aspired to join the European Union, formally applying for membership in 1987 and beginning accession negotiations in 2005. However, progress has been slow due to political, economic, and human rights concerns, as well as opposition from some EU member states. Issues such as Turkey's democratic backsliding, tensions over Cyprus, and disagreements on migration policy have further stalled negotiations. While Turkey remains a candidate country, EU membership appears unlikely in the near future, with relations instead shifting towards strategic cooperation in trade, security, and migration management. The European Union's future is uncertain, but in the short term, it's likely that it will remain a capable force. Each nation in the EU is different, making geographic cohesion hard. In nations that are net contributors, some of their populations feel that they're getting the short end of the stick, especially economically. And geopolitically, this has led to government transitions that tend to be more nationalistic. Nationalism in Europe connects to Euroscepticism, and this resulted in Brexit. So it's quite possible that larger EU nations such as France, Germany, and the Netherlands may move in that direction. Yet, other poorer European nations, ones who are already EU members or EU candidates, may want the organization to benefit their nation's success. Another thing that may happen is that the EU may remain, but protocols such as a Schengen Agreement may be either revised or fully eradicated due to the unmitigated migration that has occurred and is still occurring. There's no doubt that throughout the 21st century, there is going to be changes not only to the European Union, but to Europe in general. One possibility is secession movements. As mentioned earlier, both Scotland and Northern Ireland voted in favor of staying in the EU. The Scottish National Party and other pro-independence groups argue that Scotland should become independent and then apply for EU membership. Gibraltar, a British overseas territory south of Spain, overwhelmingly voted to remain in the EU, with 96% voting in favor. While Gibraltar is not seeking independence, there has been speculation about a closer relationship with Spain to maintain EU access. Even with secession possibilities, it's not going to occur overnight. But still, a lot will happen decades down the road that will revolutionize the European Union. A geopolitical curveball is associated with the ongoing Russia-Ukraine conflict. As of February 2025, it's in year 3. And EU nations such as Finland, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, Slovakia, Hungary, and Romania border either Russia or Ukraine. Governmentally internally, some of these nations have Eurocentric governments, while others have Eurosceptic ones. Although they may have different ideologies, one thing virtually all of them agree on is an end to the war. And as legacies of Russian and Soviet influences, these nations don't want to have their sovereignty taken away from them again. Perhaps this agreed philosophy will continually keep the EU together for the foreseeable future. Do you think that the European Union will be around in 100 years from now? I'd love to hear your opinion, so please leave your feedback in the comment section below. That concludes this week's episode. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you like learning about the world, you found the right channel. So be sure to subscribe to my channel, Urban to Earth, to view more videos. Until next time.